Excellent. Love that. Excellent. Love the choice of plant, by the way. We're both matching with the monstera in the background. Love that.
Absolutely, yeah, I love that. It's so important to have some green in your apartment. It's just bringing life.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And I think once you get into it, it becomes a bit of a hobby, and then before you know it, you're practically living in a forest.
Exactly. I'm not a specialist, actually. I just buy some plants, and some die after a couple months, and some just bliss and blossom and grow like crazy. This one behind me is probably 12 years old.
12 years old. Wow, blimey. Good stuff. Good stuff. So I think just to sort of kick things off, would you just like to go over a bit about like yourself, your background, what sort of got you into health as a whole?
Certainly. So my name is Martin Verebes. I'm a 50-year-old Franco-German from Düsseldorf, and I have really gotten conscious about health basically in the last 7 or 8 years of my life. First, about 8 years ago, I got massively overworked and overweight. I was feeling tired all the time, and I realized I really had to do something. The situation was getting critical because I was feeling like shit, first of all, and my performance at work was also affected.
And what were you doing for work at that time?
At that time, I was employed as a European sales manager in an industrial company, which, as you can imagine, requires a lot of business traveling. It's not 35 or 38 hours per week. It's a lot more. It's a lot of driving, flying, attending meetings, eating out, and life on the road isn't always healthy.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That has obviously made things worse.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, a friend of mine who has multiple sclerosis found a book about wheat products.
Right.
One night, I was at the airport about to board a flight to the UK, by the way, and I saw that book in the bookstore. I said, maybe this is a sign. I need to buy it. So I bought it, and I read it during the flight. I started reading it, and it was basically describing all the negative effects of wheat and modern day cereals.
Yes.
When I got back home, I decided to give it a try, and I quit eating bread, pasta, pizza, everything that contained wheat. And after 3 days or so, I felt even worse. And you know what? I knew from earlier experiences that whatever natural treatment, which is really effective and holistic, you're doing, when you start feeling worse in the beginning, when you have more pain, when you feel even more tired, whatever, it's a good sign, actually.
Yeah, I think maybe that could be an indicator. I think it's difficult. That'd be a difficult one to kind of say for sure. Because I think there are definitely things that maybe aren't so good. I guess an example might be something like ketosis. Going through ketosis, you feel pretty rough. And some people have a great experience with ketogenic diets. Others absolutely hate it. So again, we spoke about this previously, actually, where we spoke about how all of these things that you can actually implement for yourself, whether that be a dietary thing or whatever, because we're all so individual and so unique, the outcome is going to be so unbelievably different from individual to individual. So I think that's something to really kind of bear in mind.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Harry. So I carried on, and after 4 or 5 days, I slept a lot better, and I felt a lot less tired and exhausted after waking up and starting to work. And I decided to carry on, so I didn't eat anything that would contain wheat or cereals for probably 5 or 6 weeks. And then I treated myself with a pizza while having dinner with a friend, and it was perfectly fine. I had no adverse reaction, but I kept staying away from wheat and only eating pasta, pizza, or bread casually. Actually, in the following 8 or 9 months, I lost something like 12 kilos. And I got back in shape. I signed with a new gym. And since that, I'm on a much better track. And then the second thing that really made me aware that I had to do more was after I left my job and returned, I took a little time off and went back to a Swiss business school to learn more about my job. since my studies were more than 20 years ago. And we had a leadership training during 3 days with a coach who's a former athlete and hockey coach. And what he taught us was also to take care of your body and also the connection between your health, your happiness, and your mood, and your success and performance in business and work. And his approach is basically very similar to what he did with the young guys who were playing hockey. He spots their individual strengths and builds upon that strength. And he provides a lot of advice on exercise and nutrition to turn business managers into high performance machines. And I can tell you, it definitely works.
Yeah, no, I agree. That is everything that I believe in. I think that the link between all of those factors you just said is absolutely massive. And I think the most interesting part of that is that by enhancing one variable of your health, the others often follow. So if you're doing if you're doing a multifaceted approach, the outcome is just even bigger. It's just even bigger. So if you take one measurable variable, such as, let's say, your cardiovascular health, let's say, and you start training cardio, you're also going to start feeling good in terms of like your energy levels elsewhere, you know, and your daily energy levels, right? You're going to feel better in that regard as well. And that's just by training cardio, you know. And then, for example, you implement something like sleep, and then you have more energy, even more so. So it's just a case of picking and choosing what works for you, and then just applying them all at the same time in a sustainable way, and then you've got the biggest outcome possible.
Now, Harry, you really had a point. You were talking about a multifaceted approach. And this is exactly what I have been promoting naturally for most of my life. And I applied also in my current work as a business consultant. So I help companies in their strategic approach. And so many times, business owners ask me, should I focus more on strength or on sales, or should I put more resources into logistics and inventory management? And then I ask them, if you have a car and you have 3 excellent tires and 1 tire is complete rubbish, can you still drive to the supermarket? Yeah, obviously yes. But can you win a race with that car? Obviously not. So this multifaceted approach, actually, which is translated in this example, you cannot choose between this and that. It has to be perfect everywhere. Like in health, you cannot focus on nutrition, but neglect sleep, as an example.
No, you can't. And I think being healthy and functioning in business, the approaches are very much the same thing, in that when you're running a business, there are X amount of variables you constantly have to be keeping dialed in and working at 100%. You know, all those different processes that you need to do every single day as a business owner to make sure that you earn money, right?
Absolutely.
And that exact same principle applies to your health. So, for example, in order to be as healthy as you possibly can, as consistently as you possibly can, you have to eat a healthy diet, exercise regularly, sleep well, avoid like excess drinking, those kind of things, right? So the approach is similar in that the understanding that you need to be doing multiple things consistently over a long period of time, that fundamental is there. So I guess when it comes to working with business owners and helping them improve their health, they know that multifaceted approach is so key, and that is such an essential part of actually long-term sustainable progression, that actually translating that into health approaches is actually, it's not easy, but the understanding's there.
Yeah, absolutely, Harry. Yeah. And we've only covered part of it, actually. And mental health is critical also in performing in your job. So obviously you need to do something which you love, but you need to be aware that bad physical health will sooner or later affect your personal well-being as well.
100%. And by improving your physical well-being, you're going to be improving your mental well-being. Those two things are so linked. And again, that just links so heavily with the whole multifaceted thing, you know, because by enhancing physical health with all those variables, you're then literally boosting your mental well-being, which again is going to translate into better performance, say in business and in life in general. Like if you're a happier person, you're going to be more successful. I think that's one of the beautiful things about getting hold and taking control of your health, is that by doing it, and as soon as you start, the process just gets easier and easier and easier, because the further you get down the line of becoming a healthier person, every process becomes easier. You find more enjoyment in it, and you feel better every time that you introduce a new health-orientated practice into your routine or your life. You notice those changes. Everything's getting easier, everything's getting better, and that's just the beauty of the whole transformation stage of things.
Yeah, it's a transformation. I think that's exactly the right term. And it's all about implementing it into daily routine.
Yeah, and that's actually the next thing I wanted to ask you about. I wanted to ask you about, as a business owner who is very much orientated around health and boosting yourself as an individual to translate into your performance, what does your structure look like? What does your daily sort of routine look like?
Structure actually is critical, but I still struggle with, having been diagnosed with ADHD at some stage in my life. Obviously, it's very hard for me to maintain the structures. And I'm very good at following them for some time. Yeah, we have something in common on our before. So we can still learn from each other. Yeah, we need to know that one day we can skip the routine, but we shouldn't feel too guilty about it. It's more important to get back rather than being too hard on yourself. But basically, the routine I should follow, again, I've learned this from Mark McGregor, is start the day with some exercise. It should be moderate exercise, 20 minutes of slow running or 35 minutes of fast walking around the block, just to get your body moving. And if the weather's awful, you can still hop around in your room and do some moderate exercise. It's just to get the machine started. Then I'll have a hearty breakfast full of proteins, generally some scrambled eggs or omelette with cheese. I found out that raw dairy cheese was quite good for me. I can deal with it a lot better than pasteurized products, actually.
Yes.
And then, well, in an ideal world, some people would recommend you to meditate. I'm not very good at it, so I go to my desk and start working. And the few things I have done before already give me a much clearer focus, and I'm less tempted by distraction. Assuming I had eaten white bread and marmalade for breakfast, my mother's French, so I had this many times in my life. Actually, it's terrible. My blood sugar would crash after a couple hours, and I would get fidgety or unfocused and start mixing up my tasks, and I wouldn't be able to focus on my work. Also, I would be eating some junk just to keep my body happy until noon. And it's not good because these are extra calories, extra sugar. That makes no sense.
Yeah. And do you think that the sort of the effects that a more sugary breakfast had linked with your ADHD?
I don't know the exact correlation. I think even science still disagrees with that. But definitely people with ADHD seem to have more difficulties to maintain their blood sugar levels. So many people recommend fasting in the morning. I can only tell you that I've tried it, and it's catastrophic. It's even worse than having the white bread and marmalade for breakfast. If I had to skip a meal in order to fast for 16 hours, I'd rather skip dinner.
Yes, that's very interesting, because for me, I'm the opposite in that my approach and what helped me loads was actually delaying my first meal. I think we spoke about this before. So what my approach that has massively helped me. So I don't have ADHD, I have ADD, so slightly different, but the principles are the same. So a big part for me was maintaining focus and processing. They were the two big things for me. So for me, what I found worked really, really nicely was actually delaying that first meal of the day from, say, normally I might wake up at 7:30, 8ish. Then normally what I'd do is I'd eat straight away, pretty much. Once I'm sort of ready, maybe I'll be eating at like 8:30, 9ish, let's say. And in doing that, and I'll be obsessed with having quite a big breakfast. I like a big breakfast. I'm definitely a breakfasty kind of person. I like a big breakfast of like porridge, organic oats, berries, dark chocolate, maybe some butter, etc. So a nice sort of micronutrient diverse breakfast, right? And some sea salt as well. But I found that in doing that, shortly afterwards, I'd get loads of brain fog. So my processing would be clouded. I'd be slow at working. I'd feel sluggish. So it had the opposite effect in that rather than feeling kind of jittery and, you know, not being able to focus and being on edge and struggling in that regard, instead I was struggling with actually switching on and getting into my work. So by completely cutting out food until 10:30, I found that those 2-3 hours in the morning of work are my most productive by miles, and it works for me so well. And another thing to mention as well would be that I don't actually have caffeine in that period of time either. So caffeine, and especially as someone with ADD, I don't know what your experience is like with caffeine, but with caffeine especially, that could completely send me into a state of not being able to focus or being overstimulated by my work and not being able to really be that productive. So I cut out caffeine in that same period of time. So literally all I'm having for that first, I don't really like to use the term fasting. It is technically fasting, but I think the term fasting is, you know, it's thrown around quite a lot, and it has certain connotations that's not really what I'm going for. I think that I just delay my first meal by 3 hours. You know, it's not like I'm going, okay, right, I'm doing intermittent fasting or, you know, whatever. It's not that. But yeah, so in that period of time, no caffeine, no food, literally just water. And as part of my morning routine, I have a cold shower as well. So the cold shower is really what wakes me up. That's what gets me going. And then I just sit down and I'm into work, and I'm good to work for 2 hours before I eat. And then when I eat, I have it with caffeine. And in doing that, you don't get that overstimulation from the caffeine. And it kind of just, because obviously for me, eating might induce some brain fog, so caffeine kind of counteracts that further. So it's like they kind of cancel each other out. So that's quite nice. So that allows me to do another 2 hours work before I go off to exercise. And it's interesting because, again, that's the perfect example of, you know, how both of us have very, very different approaches to our mornings, despite having similar, you know, in terms of the ADD, ADHD, having a similar thing there that we're kind of tackling, but we're tackling it in two very, very different ways.
Yes, although one thing is not that different, actually. You delay your breakfast by a couple hours. I usually start my day, in an ideal world, I would start it between 6:30, 7, so a little earlier than you. And then start with water. I should have mentioned this. Yeah, half a liter of water is a good thing to start the day with.
Yeah.
And then I might have my first espresso. Actually, I like to say I don't drink coffee. I only drink espresso, unsweetened, of course. And
yeah, perfect.
If I have done my little morning exercise, then I'll have a hearty breakfast like omelette with cheese and a second cup of espresso. And I like to joke about the stimulation from caffeine because, you know, those who get medicated with Ritalin or similar medication for ADD, these are actually stimulants, but they tend to calm you down. So they have the opposite effect. And I like to joke that caffeine has exactly that soothing effect on me, but actually it's not perfectly true. It works with espresso because unlike regular filtered coffee, it has a lot less caffeine.
And also, one interesting thing with espresso and compared to other forms of coffee is actually how quickly you drink it, and therefore how quickly it metabolizes and the actual response in terms of the caffeine response after that. So it's interesting you said about how some stimulants can have that kind of like that opposite response. So for me, black tea or green tea was very, very beneficial because yes, it has caffeine in it, but then you have L-theanine, and L-theanine for me worked an absolute dream in that it just helps me focus so much. It helps me to kind of modulate that caffeine response. And so now I've actually changed my sort of protocol, my sort of caffeine protocol, if you will, in that I have tea as in the morning as my first source of caffeine at 10:30. And in doing that, throughout the rest of the day, I just have this kind of like added focus rather than in the morning, my first caffeine being just purely coffee and my response maybe being too much and then not quite getting those the benefits in terms of focus. So it's weird. I mean, that's very, very niche, and that's very, very kind of specific, you know, especially to myself. But I think that's still interesting because, and I know that now people are getting really into L-theanine and people are actually supplementing it before bed to help them relax, to go to sleep. they're taking it in tablet form in the morning to help. For example, they have a coffee and an L-theanine tablet, when really you could just have a cup of tea.
Yeah, right.
I mean, and have the same effects. So yeah, but I think that's a really good one as well.
I've tried supplementing with L-theanine. For me, it did not work at all. I had absolutely well, actually, I had two different products. One contained some other herbs, like I think rhodiola, and it even made me drowsy.
I've had rhodiola before and I hated it.
Really?
Hated it. Yeah. It made me it made me just feel kind of lethargic. You know, just a bit lethargic and kind of like a bit agitated, it's just kind of frustrated. It was really, really weird, actually. I remember doing it because I was trying out loads of different nootropics. And what I was doing was I was doing a week of one nootropic at a time, just to really see kind of how what that individual one made me feel. All the others I tried, I liked, and I saw some I felt some kind of benefit from. But rhodiola.
Now, I remember last time we talked, you recommended lion's mane. I've decided to give it a try. I've ordered some.
Good.
And I got it yesterday, so I took my first pill this morning.
Oh, brilliant.
And
Excellent.
we'll see what it brings. Just coming back real quick to ADD, ADHD. Sure. Actually, I don't talk too much about it. Not that I'm ashamed of it, but I know there's a huge misconception about it. And about 99.5% of the people have no real idea of what it really is. And they think it's only about fidgety children who cannot sit still in school. And then they tell me, oh, really? But you're not that nervous or fidgety, but still you can have ADD or ADHD. And it can translate in many different ways. Like some people with ADD or ADHD are terrible drivers because they get distracted and they might miss a red light. I'm the opposite. I'm extremely focused while driving. So you just cannot compare. And these categories of ADD, ADHD, and the mixed type are probably obsolete. There are multiple ways. I read a really nice book from Dr. Gabor Mate, a Canadian doctor who dealt a lot with it. And I think he explains it really well. And also this thing about getting a stimulant to actually calm down somebody with ADHD can now be explained. There are parts of the brain, I think it's the prefrontal cortex, which are kind of asleep. And these are the brain circuits that should calm you down. So you need to wake them up and stimulate these parts of the brain in order to function and calm you down when it's needed.
It's very interesting.
This is how medication works, actually.
Yeah. And that's where people kind of think there's the idea that ADHD is more of like a personality trait. That there's this thing of going, well, no, it's just these just hyper energy, agitated people that can't focus on anything. And I think that's interesting about what you said with the fact that you can be very, very, very focused, because there's that term in regards to ADHD called hyperfocus, where people with ADHD, they can sit down and they can just get completely tunnel vision focused and fixated on things and have incredibly productive stints of work or doing or whatever they're engaging in. They can be really productive with it. It's not necessarily something that they should be doing, which is why there's the link between people with ADHD and procrastination. And, you know, if they're meant to be revising or whatever, they're doing something else and getting hyper focused in the wrong thing. So it's not that it can be beneficial, but it can also be the total opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to build on your strength. And definitely, I would be bored to death if I had to perform mundane routine tasks like writing visit reports or making my expense notes.
Oh, yeah. A huge thing for me was in building my own day was that I make sure I put my most boring or most difficult tasks in the morning, like first thing, because that way I know that, and again, with delaying my food as well, I know that those 2 hours are very productive. So I put my most tedious or boring tasks in the morning so they're out of the way, because I know in myself that towards the afternoon and working into the early evening, if I'm working into the early evening, that in that period of time my focus is going to be nowhere near as good. I'm going to start feeling tired. I'm not going to be as willing to do things. So I make sure that the tasks I have towards the end of the day are ones that I enjoy more. So I've got a much bigger motivation to do them. Because I think such a huge part when it comes to work is, as you said earlier, just enjoying what you're doing. Making sure you actually really enjoy what you're doing. Because regardless of what sort of field of work you're in or what business you have or whatever, there's always aspects that are less enjoyable and more tedious. So I think, and as a business owner, it's very important to go, right, what are those tasks? What parts do I dislike? What parts do I like? And then you need to structure your day around them, because you can't say, right, I'm going to put these things I love doing in the morning, and then I'm going to leave my hardest task towards the end of the day.
Yeah, sometimes it's not possible, I agree. But this hyper focus can be so beneficial. I remember I've spent more than 20 years in sales, and one of my favorite situations was like, I'm driving to the airport to attend meetings, and the customer is calling saying, the material you have supplied is faulty. Our manufacturing line will stand still by tomorrow. Please help. And most colleagues would be freaking out completely. And this is where I would just pull over, make some phone calls, decide to cancel my flight, see the customer the next morning, get a hotel, get someone to inspect the material with me, inform my colleagues in China or in the US about what happened. And that really stimulates me.
Yeah, awesome. The benefits of ADHD.
Exactly.
You know? Can't complain.
Actually, you should use it as a superpower. Many people consider it's something debilitating or it's a handicap, but it's not. And as you rightly said, it's not just a personality trait, because people with ADD, ADHD can have very different personalities, but overall, it's a different way of functioning.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so just sort of dialing back to your daily routine, and you mentioned exercise. What is your approach to exercise? Is that something you do every single day? Do you have a set kind of period of time to exercise? Like, is it half an hour a day? Is it an hour a day? And what's your protocol?
In the past 7 years, I did some kickboxing in the local gym. So we had our training sessions in the evening. And for several reasons, I've stepped away from that. Also during lockdowns, everything was closed. So I decided to do more training at home. I invested in some equipment like a pull-up bar, a kettlebell, and these kind of things. I learned some new exercises. And I'm a big believer in body weight exercise, actually. You know, I love to train even outdoors, whenever it's possible. I'm an outdoor kind of person. If I could, I'd have my entire desk and my couch and my bed in the garden. See what kind of person I am. When the weather's like this, it's absolutely brilliant. So I've realized with time that when you get older, you obviously take longer to regenerate from intense exercise. And I've read, and from many trustworthy sources, as you get 50 years old and beyond, you should rather focus on strength training, build up muscles, and take it a little slower with cardio. So,
it's interesting when it comes to the research with how do you exercise as you enter 50, 60 plus, because strength training is important, but then there's the consideration of injury, and you want to be careful with injury. But when we're talking about things like sarcopenia, so the onset of, muscles degenerating, and when we look at that, actually, there's a big link with strength training, and strength training being very beneficial. But then, obviously being careful with injury. But one thing, and this kind of leads into the supplementation side of things, is how beneficial creatine has been found in that regard for that population, is that going into 50, 60 onwards, getting your 5 grams of creatine every day has literally been shown to reduce the onset of sarcopenia, which is absolutely massive. And I mean, I'm sure you have some stuff to talk about in regard to creatine, but it is literally one of the if not the best supplement going, and it just combines so well with the training side of things, as well as, obviously everyone knows it as an exercise performance supplement, in that it's good for getting more reps in the tank, reducing fatigue while you're exercising, that kind of thing, and enhancing strength. But actually, when we look at with individuals that are going from 50, 60 onwards, it's really beneficial with reducing sarcopenia. And it has massive benefits for the brain as well. Huge benefits for the brain, things like focus and memory. Creatine is excellent. I think it links quite a lot with what you were just saying about in terms of changing your protocols as a 50-year-old and changing how you actually approach training, and then maybe actually how you could introduce something like creatine. Like, do you take creatine?
I have tried it. Actually, one of my friends from the gym, who is in his early 20s and a very high-performing athlete who trains at least 1 hour a day, if not 2, has recommended me to take some creatine. I've tried it, but I've taken only 2 grams per day. I think he's taking 5 grams, but he's a lot taller and heavier than me, and also he's a vegetarian, whereas I'm eating meat several times a week, so I can already get some creatine from quality red meat.
Yeah,
I've
true.
tried with 2 grams per day. I didn't feel any big result. I didn't feel anything negative at all. Maybe I gained some muscle mass, yes, but it wasn't really huge. So as I'm trying not to take too many things at a time, I decided to quit and focus on other things. But really, I can't say anything against creatine either.
Yeah. It is, in terms of the effects that you actually experience. It is quite, with lots of supplements, it's very minimal. You know, most of the time it's very minimal. Creatine's the same, and that you don't start taking it and go, oh my god, I feel like Superman. But the changes are there. They 100% are there. I mean, it is the most researched supplement on the market, and I mean, 5 grams, maybe 3 grams, that's also okay. But the actual benefits are massive. And as you said, you eat quite a lot of red meat, but with the red meat thing, I mean, you'd have to have a 500-gram steak. I think it's 1 gram of creatine per 100 grams of red meat. I think lamb and beef being the big ones. So you'd have to effectively have a 500-gram steak every day to get your daily creatine, which is why it's recommended for everyone, whether you exercise, whether you don't exercise. It's recommended for everyone to take 3 to 5 grams a day of creatine. So things like memory and focus and general cognition and energy levels across the board. So reducing fatigue is a big one. So obviously, as a business owner, fatigue is the worst thing ever. Things like fatigue and brain fog are like the 2 biggest killers when it comes to productivity throughout your day. You have to be able to manage that, and you have to be able to function as well as you possibly can throughout the day. And something like creatine, it's such a cheap and accessible supplement, 5 grams in the morning, and it massively helps reduce fatigue. It massively helps. That's noticeable change. I think.
I might give it a try at some point in time. What I've noticed is that glutamine had a lot of those benefits as well.
Yes.
Especially when it comes to mood enhancement and cognitive performance. My doctor recommended it to me, and we found out that because it enhances the production of GABA, it also enhances the mood. So that was very beneficial, definitely. So I'm supplementing with L-glutamine and also omega-3s. And you were just talking about 500 grams of steak to get your level of creatine. I remember one day somebody was asking an expert in a podcast, can't I get my level of vitamin D from nutrition only? And the expert answered, yes, you can, but you would have to swallow 50 cans of tuna every day. So probably nutrition doesn't give us everything we need, especially as high-performing business people or athletes who need just a higher amount of vitamins, amino acids, all the good things.
Yeah, it's annoying, I think. I think that's quite frustrating, because I think in an ideal world, you would be able to get away with not supplementing and just getting all of your nutrients you need and micronutrients you need just from food. And I wish that was the case. But I think there is a link between farming protocols not being as good now that has actually decreased the micronutrient content of loads of the foods we eat, especially in plant food, so fruit and veg. I think there was some information released by the FDA a couple of years ago that basically said that most fruit and veg farmed now has got 30% of the micronutrient content than it should have. 30% of it. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's unbelievable. So that's a massive motive for doing things like shopping organic and and opting for organic fruit and veg, because that has a much higher micronutrient content in it. And again, that reduces your need for things like supplementation. But that's huge. That's absolutely huge. I mean, if you're looking at things that can help with like energy levels, like vitamin C being the cheapest of the vitamins, ascorbic acid, literally the cheapest of the vitamins, most accessible. Ideally, you could just get that from fruit and from veg. But, you know, with that massive decreased quantity now, but albeit from the poor farming we have now, and all these chemicals used on crops, etc., that it's a bit of a shame, because it nudges you towards almost needing to supplement if you want to hit that kind of higher level of making sure you're getting all those nutrients in.
Yeah, I mean, nutrition is such a vast subject. We could probably spend an extra podcast on it. I'd be very happy to do that with you one day.
Likewise.
But, coming back to supplementation, I'm not enthusiastic swallowing pills and powders every day. But sometimes you just have to.
Yeah, exactly. You just have to. And if you want to kind of make sure you're getting X amount of whatever, or the right amounts of whatever, or if you want to kind of scratch the surface of things like nootropics or creatine being a nootropic. I mean, even, L-theanine, L-glutamine, you know, all those things. You just have to. You're not going to get it from your diet alone. And I think there's a degree of acceptance of just going, right, I'm not going to get this from my diet, and I need to just kind of supplement. And I mean, I'm a huge fan of supplementation. I'm a huge fan of it. I think in terms of how useful it is and how easy it is, it's a great option. It really is a great option.
You know what? I've realized we have something else in common. We try a lot of different things on our own bodies before recommend it to others. And this is why we probably had a little disagreement last time we talked. You are very strict on following the science. I have a different interpretation. I've realized that too many times following the science is just giving away your own reasoning and putting it in the hands of some foreign authority. And science has unfortunately discredited itself a lot. I mean, there were scientists, these are extreme examples, but it happens. Some scientists have determined that smoking wasn't an issue for your health. If they were paid by some tobacco corporation, they could come up to such results. Coming back also to some less extreme example, I mean, you read those magazines sometimes, I mean, the low-key magazines, and you can read in one article which says there was a study of this university which determined that coffee was good for your health. And then 3 months later, you need another copy of the same magazine which says a study of the University of Y has determined that coffee is bad for your health. You should write a letter to the chief editor and say, do you have a memory problem? Or what is it?
And that is one of the most frustrating things of being in the health space, is that it's always changing all the time. Every day, every minute, something new happens that contradicts something else that was said. There's obviously the huge thing, which is it depends, being the most common phrase used in health and in nutrition, is that it always depends from individual to individual. So depending on your study size and who's actually in your sample of the study, each one of those individuals in the study is going to have an individual response. So which completely throws reliability off the scale. But I still think that when it comes to the research and to considering what you should kind of try out yourself, I think that using the research is useful. I think it's there for a reason. I think that if you have big enough sample sizes and good randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies, then that's a good kind of gold standard to go by. And then you can kind of get a rough idea on how that might work with yourself, but you should never take anything you see as fact. You shouldn't go, right, because this worked for X with X level of reliability, it's 100% going to work for myself, because it might not necessarily do that. So I think that there's always an element of trial and error when you're trying things for yourself. I think that's like a huge thing, is that you have to try things for yourself and actually see. Say, for example, like lion's mane, right? The research on lion's mane is very small. It's not like creatine where there is loads of research on it. Lion's mane, the research is very new. But that being said, it's good research. It's good research. So in that regard, I was like, right, I'm not going to take that as fact, but what I am going to do is I think it could be worth trying out and seeing how I get on myself. And I've been taking it now for 2 years, and I absolutely swear by it, and I literally know it works for me. I know that it does. So as a result, I have my clients take it and furthermore from that, they've had great results with it as well. So it's like, yes, there's no research to say it's bad. We know it's safe. So, which is obviously the main thing is before you try on yourself, know that it's actually safe, obviously. And then going forward, try it on yourself and see how you get on. I mean, there's people that don't get on with creatine. There's people that hate creatine. I've worked with people that creatine's given them horrible responses in terms of feeling really dehydrated or sweating profusely. So even that, which is the most researched supplement on the market, doesn't necessarily correlate to everyone.
This is my point with science. Yeah, you can use or abuse science as an authority to tell you what to do and what not to do. I remember there was a study, quite a large study, which had determined a few years ago that vegetarians were on average living 2 years longer than people who ate meat regularly. And then someone took a deeper look into that study, and they found out that the group of meat eaters was quite large, but they were mostly formed by alcoholics, smokers, and couch potatoes. So when I see this and I'm telling myself, only 2 years less, well, I'd rather have a steak and a glass of wine then.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. Which is why, and that just stresses the importance of doing your own reading and doing your own research, because and not taking things as fact, because it's all in the sample size, it's all in what that population is, and you know, which is why that whole thing came about from veganism, where you get all these like health benefits from these health benefits from going vegan, and people swear by going vegan and they say they feel at the best they've ever felt in their life. And you look at these studies, and it says, and for example, it's like the difference over the course of a year on the vegan diet or 6 months on the vegan diet, right? And there's all these markers saying, that they lost weight, they feel better, they're stronger, whatever. And then you look at what's actually happened, and what's actually happened is that they've introduced the vegan diet, but also they've made better lifestyle changes across the board. So they've started to exercise more. They've started to cut out alcohol. They've started to sleep better. They've started to do other things to improve their health. So then, how on earth do you attribute the one thing to them just going vegan?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this same thing happens across the board with those kind of studies, because at the end of the day, there are studies out there that are trying to create a response, and they're trying to have a certain outcome. So whether they're trying to push an agenda or whatever, which lots of them out there are, unfortunately, it's a real shame. But you have to be really critical. And I think as a business owner, or as anyone who wants to kind of get hold of their health and maybe learn more about it and do the reading into it and get a better understanding of it, you have to accept that it's very important to do your own reading. I wouldn't go to news articles or things like that where actually they might be trying to push an agenda or a response. The best thing that I'd recommend doing is going somewhere like PubMed or Google Scholar and directly reading the research itself, because for the most part it's non-biased, and if you know what you're doing, if you know what you're looking for, then you can go and you can look at things like Google Scholar, and you can go look and you can look for a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study, and then you know the gold standard, and then you can really go, right, read through them all and then make an idea. And then obviously the last thing being trying it on yourself to see what the outcome actually is.
Yeah. You know, this word double blind triggers me a lot, because I mean, you mentioned these people who claim huge health benefits after going vegan as an example. And I know a couple of people who've done this, and they've really had some health benefits, no doubt about it. But other people went paleo or even carnivore and report the same benefits. And you know why? My personal opinion, because these are both kind of elimination diets, and their body was responding to one or two things, probably also wheat or milk and dairy, in a very extreme manner. And since they've cut out let's say the wheat, they can eat as many vegetables or as much meat as they want. They'll feel better, obviously, because they've cut back this one thing that was harmful for them. But the issue is, you have lactose intolerant people, You have people who have celiac disease, so they cannot eat any kind of wheat, and you can get tested. And I got tested for both, and I was negative on both. But still, when I eat bread, I feel negative consequences, especially if it's cheap white bread, like a sandwich you would get on a motorway service. I can guarantee you I can't drink a cup of cappuccino without feeling the impact for the rest of the day on my stomach. And still my test will be negative. So what really upsets me is that some scientists are literally double blind to reality, because there's obviously a huge amount of people who suffer, who are sick, although their tests are negative. But all they say is, it must be in your head. Basically, they tell you something's wrong in your head if you don't follow the law that science has established. And in contrast, I really advocate, like you do, to be curious and be your own scientist and try on your own body.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, it's only... The research there is only going to go a certain distance, and it's not going to apply to everyone. I think that's like the biggest takeaway, really, isn't it? Is that, yes, we're lucky enough to have an abundance of research out there, but we still need to kind of take things in our own stride and try things for ourselves, rather than just take everything that we read as fact and just roll with it. I think that's like the biggest takeaway.
I like to say it's not curiosity which killed the cat; it's complacency.
Yes. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to touch on at all?
I think we could go on for several hours, like the Joe Rogan experience. We've talked about our morning routines. Every day, every good day has an end.
Yeah, we've gone through morning routines. We've gone through some of our practices throughout the day. Yeah, let's look into the evening before we wrap up. So, first of all, what are you like with sleeping? Are you the kind of person that struggles to sleep? Do you normally sleep well? Have you needed to implement things to help you boost your sleep?
Normally, and that's quite untypical for ADHD, I sleep quite well. I used to go to bed rather early, and I need a lot of sleep. I need 8 to 9 hours every night, and I don't need a real huge protocol, except, of course, that I shouldn't be eating huge dinners late. That makes sense. That's not rocket science. And I like my room to be fresh and as dark as just possible.
Yeah.
And then I avoid disturbances. Like I avoid watching a movie beyond 10:30, like an action movie, and then go to bed immediately. I'd rather
100%.
skip TV, watch movies only on weekends, and then read. I like to read a lot. And I've programmed my phone to switch off the ringtone between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's such a key part of making sure your sleep is top tier, is making sure that you are completely switching off and removing yourself from the stresses of the working day. So yeah, I do a very, very similar thing in that for me at sort of 6:30, 7-ish, it's no more phone really. I mean, maybe I'll talk to my girlfriend or something like that, but what I can actually do on my phone is I can pause apps. So if I did want to go on my phone and just for whatever reason, I can pause my work related apps. So like the app I use for training my clients and LinkedIn and WhatsApp and those things, and I can pause all those apps and then just continue to go on my phone and not be disturbed by those notifications and not then view them until the next day, which is really, really useful. Another thing I like doing, I don't know if you like doing this, but I will typically plan my whole next day but as the last thing I do. So for example, today, the last thing I'll do today is write my to-do list for tomorrow. And that way I'm mentally ready for tomorrow and I can happily put my phone down, put my work away and go, right, I know what I need to do tomorrow. I'm ready for tomorrow, and now I can just spend the evening relaxing and having a good night's sleep, and there's nothing more to think about.
Yeah, this is something
I think that's really useful.
Finishing my working day, but when it comes to 8, 9, 10 p.m., yeah, it's really switching my phone off and only being able to be reached in case of real personal dire emergencies. And of course, I want people to be able to call me in the middle of the night. But otherwise, no, I sleep rather well, actually. And whenever I don't, it's a good indicator for me that something's wrong. So I take it as a warning sign. if my sleep
Yeah.
isn't good. And yeah, what I also try to avoid is real intense physical exercise, like those kickboxing classes, which were typically between 7 and 8 p.m. And I noticed too many times that after going back home, I was still lying in my bed, tossing and turning around with my resting heartbeat around 90. And
Yes. Yes.
then I wouldn't sleep well
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
rest of the night either.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting thing as well, is that you shouldn't be exercising too close to when you go to bed, because it takes your depending on your cardiovascular health, your heart rate takes a certain amount of time to actually drop back to resting, and obviously to enter a good sleep state you want to be as low as possible, or at least as close to your resting as possible. So yeah, I mean that's another thing. So obviously two big things to do when it comes to a sleep protocol in going to bed is not eating too close to going to bed. So for me, I typically leave about 2-3 hours before going to bed is when I have my last meal of the day. That allows you to eat, digest, and your blood sugar levels to restabilize before going to bed. The worst thing you can do is eat right before going to bed. I mean, if you have to, some people in their position where they're quite literally coming home, they have half an hour to quickly eat, and then they basically have to go to bed because they're going to be waking up at 4 a.m. to go back to work, right? And those people, that's something they have to do. But the best thing to do there would just be to eat a less carb heavy meal and just focus on more complex carbohydrate sources, and just like avoid simple sugars before going to bed, because a complex carb means slower long-term digest, rather than if it's a high sugar thing or simple carb, which will result in a blood sugar spike, which is then going to increase your heart rate and your body temp, which is the worst thing you want to do before going to bed. And again, that links in with exercise as well, in that you don't want to be exercising within 2 hours of going to sleep either, depending on your cardiovascular health. If you're very, very healthy, the healthiest individuals, they can exercise and their heart rate can drop very, very quickly back to resting. But again, that adds the whole thing of individuals having to take individual responses, because that massively depends on your own cardiovascular health. But they're two, I guess, in terms of like a template of two things you can do, you can implement straight away into your routine to boost your sleep. Those two are two very, very good options.
Definitely. Yeah, this is how the day should end, and we are ready for the next day. Otherwise, you mentioned planning your next working day. This is something I would do a lot earlier when finishing my working day at whatever 6 p.m. or so. What I might do is I had this habit since my childhood, prepare my clothes for the next morning. It's just a very simple routine. And also preparing my bag and my documents if I had to travel for my work, because I know exactly that if I have to wake up earlier than usually do, in order to drive or to fly to see a customer, I might forget half of my documents or my product samples because I'm not fully concentrated in the early morning without my usual morning routine. So in order to avoid these incidents, I'll prepare everything the night before.
Yeah, and that links with the whole mentally preparing yourself for the next day and being ready to allow yourself to actually relax in that evening and then sleep with as minimal stress as possible. Because it's that subconscious thing of knowing you're ready for the next day, and in doing that, automatically you're going to relax more, and you are just going to be far more ready to go into the next day.
Totally agree. Yeah, routines may be important, even if some people don't like to hear that. There is at some level you need them.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. And I think, with routine, especially as a business owner, routine is very key. It'd be very, very hard to succeed in business if you don't have routine and you're just being spontaneous and you're just going about things that you need to do. I think it'd be very hard to do that. Some people, I'm sure, can do that. That's probably how some people like to operate. I think generally, for the most of us, we'd rather have a degree of structure, and with that structure comes more productivity. And in having structure, you're going to make yourself time to do things like exercise and have other practices throughout the day, or things to do that will help your health, right? So you could set time for a cold shower in the morning, or your meditation, or something like that, getting outside for a walk, those kind of things that if you didn't plan your day and you didn't structure your day, you might actually really struggle to do so, because you might go, okay, right, I've got this X amount of work I need to do. Then you might just sit down and crack on with that work. Then before you know it, it's the end of the day and you've done nothing else, and you haven't had any breaks, or you know, you haven't gone outside for a walk, you haven't gone to the gym. Well, actually, if you planned your day around it, you might have been able to do that. So as a business owner who wants to kind of boost their health and get on top of their health and then utilize their improved health even further to the point where it's going to boost their performance in business, you have to understand that building a very, very good key structure that works for yourself is absolutely so important.
Definitely.
And you have to just accept that you might need a structure. And then maybe on a weekend, if you're not working on the weekend, you can then completely not do those things. And I think as well, having a degree of flexibility as well is very key. So not getting too set in your routine, so not getting too obsessed with the specifics is very important, because you don't want to get in a point where, you know, if something doesn't quite go to plan in that, an aspect of your routine falls apart, you have to be able to just go, right, okay, I just need to adjust and adapt and do something, and not see it as a huge
routine
negative.
should help you, not control you.
Yes, 100%. And part of that comes with understanding and just knowing what to do. I think people have ideas of how their day should kind of look, but sometimes you just need a bit of extra insight on, especially when it comes to implementing health practices, especially as a business owner. You just need to know when and how to do certain things. If that be go to the gym every day, there's the misconception that a good gym session has to be 2 hours long. You know, if you're smart about it, and you have the right knowledge and you know what to do, and you know how to construct a program or a set of sessions around your goals, you can have a good session in 20 minutes. You can have a very good session in 20 minutes.
Agree. Not so long ago, for a period of time, I was doing some 20 minutes or 30 minutes strength training 5 times a week, and the way I gained muscle was just surprising. I didn't even take creatine. I was saying, hey, where is this sarcopenia?
Yeah, just defying it. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, man. I mean, to be honest, that's pretty much everything. We've gone slightly over. So I guess like the biggest takeaways are, as a business owner or an individual that wants to kind of really get on top of your health, and if you want to learn more about your health as well, it's very important to do the reading and actually get quite involved with it, rather than just taking information as fact from sources. And if you did want to make a change, then the best thing to do would be to find some kind of guidance in someone who has a similar approach and it can help funnel that research towards you. I think that's very, very important. And having a good structure, having good protocols in place, and maybe looking at things like supplementation, if that be something that you're interested in as well. So yeah, I mean, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so. As I said before, we can do further podcasts anytime and cover other subjects. But as far as today's podcast concerned, no, it was really a pleasure. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Harry. And yeah.
Likewise. Yeah. Awesome, man. I'm just going to hit stop on the recording. So yeah, cheers for your time, and we'll definitely get a new podcast in at some point in the future.
Thank you so much, Harry.